Sharks, crocs, and closing coal are all lopsided priorities of the Greens. The Greens are the problem, Conservatives in the Senate are the answer. Hello, I'm Lyle Shelton, and you're with the Queensland Conservative. Also in this week's episode, none other than the Deputy Premier, Jackie Trad, takes a swipe, and I reveal the creepiest Planned Parenthood ad ever. Don't go away. Hello, I'm Lyle Shelton. You're back with the Queensland Conservative. Sydney-based tech billionaire Mike Cannon-Brookes casts a compelling vision. He imagines Australia as having no more new coal-fired power stations and all of our electricity coming from renewables such as wind and solar. Australia should be at 200% renewables, with 100% being exported to the world. We should be a renewable superpower. The idea is that with our vast deserts and windy coastlines, there should be no need for coal-fired power stations anymore. Cannon-Brookes was featured on the ABC's 7:30 program last week, where he spruiked his vision and lamented that the only thing standing in the way was politicians who lacked vision. Now, if you're a millennial watching this hip, long-haired, articulate, T-shirt-wearing icon of contemporary success telling those knuckle-dragging Conservative politicians in Canberra to get with the times, you'd probably be cheering him along. But there was no discussion on the ABC about how Cannon-Brookes' idea could be implemented. What would it cost? Could wind and solar power an entire industrialised economy? Could they provide baseload, dispatchable electricity to householders and industry? Despite billions of dollars of subsidies from the pockets of taxpayers, the renewable industry is failing on each of these questions and doesn't look like answering them anytime soon. There is no advanced industrialised economy in the world running on 100% renewables. In Europe, where man-made climate change is assumed truth, they are far further down the track when it comes to the rollout of windmills and other non-fossil fuel sources of power. But in Europe, the great backup for the failure of wind and solar to provide on-demand electricity is coal and nuclear. Yet Cannon-Brookes wants us to convert to what he calls 200% renewable energy, exporting the other 100% to the world. He doesn't tell us what it would cost to build and distribute all this renewable power. For some clues and a reality check, we can look right here in Queensland. The state Labor government is spending $1 billion on a windmill facility just north of Rockhampton. And by the government's own admission, this $1 billion facility will produce, wait for it, just 3% of the state's electricity needs. And of course, when the wind is not blowing, it will produce 0% of the state's electricity needs. Even federal Labor, which wants a 50% renewable target, has not revealed how much this policy will cost taxpayers and those of us who get electricity bills in the mail. Emeritus Professor of Earth Sciences at the University of Melbourne, Professor Ian Plimer, estimates that Labor's policy will add another $86 billion to the cost of electricity, causing household electricity bills to rise another $600 per annum. So when Cannon-Brookes says, let's go 200% renewables, what is the cost? If every 3% of wind power costs $1 billion in capital costs, the retail cost will be horrendous. Yet we keep hearing that coal is uneconomical and that the future is wind or solar. Well, if wind and solar are receiving billions of dollars out of the pockets of the taxpayers and coal is receiving nothing, of course it is going to send coal-fired power stations broke. But the ABC failed to discuss what the Australian newspaper this week reported. Cannon-Brookes has invested heavily in the Solar Asset Fund, which has received $50 million in taxpayer loans from the government's Clean Energy Fund. He is investing in an industry which is propped up by money from our pockets. It can't stand on its own feet. Meanwhile, we have closed 10 coal-fired power stations in the last 12 years and not replaced them. The massive Liddell coal-fired power station in the Hunter Valley is due to close within the next 2 or 3 years, and there are no plans to replace its capability to produce reliable baseload power. This is simply reckless. No wonder the Australian energy market operator is warning of summer blackouts. Remember the so-called National Energy Guarantee, which was unanimously endorsed by the Liberals' party room? It said that the way to keep the lights on was to ration power to heavy industry. This is no way to run a first world economy. Trendy hipsters like Cannon Brooks paint a compelling vision and one we would all want in an ideal world, but they don't tell us how they intend to arrive at this nirvana. The supreme irony of the climate change debate is that you and I are paying massive costs through our taxes and then through skyrocketing electricity bills to enrich tech billionaires like Cannon Brooks. But journalists at the ABC fail us when they don't ask people like him inconvenient questions like how will it work and who will pay. I'm Lyle Shelton, you're with the Queensland Conservative. Welcome back, you're with the Queensland Conservative, I'm Lyle Shelton. One of the creepiest pro-abortion advertisements I've ever seen popped up on social media this week. We are greeted by the face of a beautiful, healthy, smiling baby girl. She deserves to be loved. She deserves to be wanted. She deserves to be a choice. Hashtag stand with Planned Parenthood. Now, responsibility for this macabre advertisement is claimed at the end of the ad by an organisation called Agenda Project Action Fund. More of that later. But for those who don't know, Planned Parenthood is the biggest abortion provider on the planet. It has killed 7.6 million unborn babies since 1973, and it kills annually more than 300,000 babies in the United States. Back in 2015, citizen journalist David Daleiden released a series of undercover videos after an elaborate sting operation revealing Planned Parenthood staff negotiating the sale of organs and other baby parts from aborted babies. A story largely suppressed by the mainstream media, the revelations led to pressure to strip Planned Parenthood of taxpayer funding. Here in Australia, when Julie Bishop was Foreign Minister, she gifted $10 million of Australian taxpayers' money through her overseas aid program to a Planned Parenthood international affiliate in the Pacific. With polls in the US finding young Americans increasingly pro-life and polls everywhere showing that people are increasingly uncomfortable and squeamish with late-term abortions, it is no wonder groups like Agenda Project Action Fund are rallying around Planned Parenthood. I googled Agenda Project Action Fund and its website said the Agenda Project's goal is to build a powerful, intelligent, well-connected political movement capable of identifying and advancing rational, effective ideas in public debate and in so doing ensure our country's enduring success. It's incredible that a baby girl can be described euphemistically as a choice. How is it rational to present an image like this with the powerful suggestion that choice means that the baby should have been killed in its mother's womb? Is that the sort of mental gymnastics intelligent, well-connected political movements produce in the 21st century? But if you thought that sort of thinking was for the Only in America file, then think again. Just this week, I took to Twitter. I know my political advisors keep telling me to stay away from Twitter, but I can't help it. There was a story in the Courier Mail about how the Liberal National Party leadership is trying to protect the political careers of three of its members who voted in favour of Jackie Tradd's, the Deputy Premier's, radical abortion to birth legislation last month. Now, rank and file members of the LNP want the three, this is Tim Nichols, Jan Stuckey, Steve Minikin, they want these three to be disendorsed because they voted against party policy, which is pro-life. Now, that's a fair call. If politicians vote against policy that the members have put in place, it is reasonable that they are to be held accountable to the members. But a protection racket exists for LNP politicians who vote for what are deemed to be progressive causes. Those calling for the three to be disciplined were labelled by the Courier Mail as hardliners. Now, on reading about all this, I tweeted, "If the public really knew the full horror of Jackie Trad's abortion to birth law, the word hardliner would be applied differently. Allowing women to be coerced to have an abortion, the weeding out of baby girls through sex selection, poisoning and dismemberment of unborn babies is hardline." Now, what happened next surprised me. Later that night, Jackie Trad herself tweeted back and said this, "Hey Lyle Shelton, Queensland abortion law reform done and dusted. Time you toddled off to find another 21st century progressive cause of equality and fairness to campaign against and lose." I replied on Twitter to the Deputy Premier with this, "Too many of my fellow Queenslanders know the truth about what you have done. We will continue to be advocates for human rights for the unborn and for their mothers, despite what your law allows to be done to them." Now, I didn't get a reply to that tweet. Perhaps there is none. The best reply, I think, is the image of the cute, life-filled face of the baby girl which Agenda Plan Action Fund says can be violently erased in her mother's womb because she is no more than a choice. God help our sick society. You've been watching The Queensland Conservative. I'm Lyle Shelton. Welcome back. You're with Lyle Shelton. This is The Queensland Conservative. Well, Queensland perfect one day, an attack by a wild animal the next. The tragic death of a Victorian tourist at the jaws of a Whitsunday shark last week has put the spotlight back on so-called wildlife conservation policies. This is the third shark attack in the beautiful Whitsundays this year, with crocodiles causing similar havoc in our north as they gradually invade waterways further and further to the south. Something has got to be done. Locals will tell you that both sharks and crocs are in plague proportions, but they are not allowed to be culled. Sugarcane farmers walk about their irrigation ditches in fear. Dogs go missing near the Esplanade in Cairns, while cattle drinking the Fitzroy River are grabbed by the muzzle and dragged into a death roll. Farmers have been fined by the government for shooting crocs when they should be hailed as heroes. Fishermen have noted dramatic rises in shark numbers, but still the tourist attacks continue. People have swum in relative safety at Syd Harbour throughout Queensland's history. Now families are afraid to go into the water. The refrain from the Greens is that us humans have to learn to adapt to the environment of the wild animals, not the other way round. Green ideology does not view human life as of any greater worth than animal life. Greens would rather reduce human numbers than the numbers of dangerous animals. Well, I think it is time that we put humans at the top of the food chain again. Of course, everyone, including me, wants to make sure that we preserve our environment, including the dangerous animals that inhabit it. But that does not mean that when the wild animal populations are out of control, that they should not be humanely culled. Talk to the locals in North and Central Queensland. They will tell you that rivers that were once safe for swimming are no longer safe. The Greens' instinct is to rule out any sort of cull, no matter how many human lives are lost. Humans simply have to make way for the animals, no matter how dangerous they are. Perhaps if crocs were taking from the banks of the Brisbane River little yappy dogs owned by the green hipsters of West End, it would be a different story. I'm Lyle Shelton. You've been with the Queensland Conservatives. Until next week, stay out of the water.